Okay, this is the first time I've done a sort of three-part. This is 34C. Um, so anyway, I've read through my notes and I'm going to try and cover from the bottom of these notes upwards. So this is a bit off at a tangent, but I had a dream last night and it was a bit of a bizarre dream. Sort of several dreams actually. And I was with family that I haven't seen since before the cult. So going back to 1995, people I haven't seen in decades, and they came into my dream, and I was in a sort of in the home, and my auntie was there, and some of my cousins were there, and my auntie would not let me watch the football, and I was sat on this seat, and they were all very much against me. I love dream interpretation and making sense of dreams, but sometimes to interpret that, it for me is like, okay, did I abandon my family, or and no, I didn't. Cults are very clever in the way they alienate you from your friends, family, support network. They might cause somebody to get divorced. Oh, your partner doesn't love God, you should leave them. That's what God wants. And then they leave their partner because they think if they don't, they're going to go to hell. But this video is obviously about recovery, and I kind of felt, well, if I tried to go back to my family, maybe they'll hate me. And it with my personal circumstance, there's people I haven't seen in decades, but for some people that I've met, it's like, obviously that they have family issues. I actually didn't really have any family issues before the cult. I got on well. There weren't any negative issues. There weren't. There wasn't much, relationship, but at least it wasn't toxic. But there's some people, it's like they might have left a cult. They might have joined a cult. The family tried to help them, and then it failed, and they're still in the cult, and the family have given up, and then there's sort of quite a lot of toxicity, and when they leave the cult, they don't feel they can repair those relationships. I think maybe that's the dream. It was a strange dream, but my auntie, she was saying, "Oh no, you can sit on the chair, but you mustn't look at the TV with the football." I thought, and I could hear the football, but no, you're not allowed to watch the football. What's that about? Strange dream. And then the dream became another dream, and I was in this party environment, at this sort of venue, sort of restaurant, clubby type place. Hundreds of people there, and it was a sort of social party, but it was in the cult, so I'd be watching people going on these sort of cult dates, and I was with some friends, and it's like, oh, that's the cult that I used to be in. Oh, they seem that they're having such a good time. Oh, I kind of miss it. And then one of my friends was reminding me, yeah, but they're all fake. Yeah, but they look like they're having a good time, don't they? Yes. And then we had to sort of escape this venue, but we had to sort of climb up this sort of tunnel. It was like trying to climb up through clothes and all kinds. It was a bizarre dream, but we were trying to escape the party, but we couldn't find the sort of exit to this sort of clubby place, and we had to sort of climb out. And again, I'm sure dream interpretation can make sense of that. Oh, you do miss the group, yes, but you're trying to escape. What's holding you back? And it's like people who've experienced an intense cult situation, some of us will talk about it for years and years and years afterwards. For me, it was 20 years of my life. It was from when I left uni, you know, or, I don't work anymore, but, it was 20 years. Of course, you're going to have sort of flashbacks and memories, and again, this video is about partial recovery. I don't want to make it into a 4-part video, but, you know, before on this line here, right? I'm just going through these notes. So I've said the dream. When you sort of, sometimes if you're trying to help somebody out of a cult, one of the first things is, where are they? Who do they know in the cult? And a lot of cult members will use social media to promote the cult. And when you look at their social media on Facebook or any other, X or whatever it is, TikTok, you name it, they're obsessed about the cult, as if the cult is the only thing going on in their life. Oh yeah, we're having a service on Sunday, it'll be great. What else happens in your life? Sometimes you go to social media and you see people and you think, God, that's a very shallow person. All they do is being a train spotter. Now, I love trains. But, it's like at least they're probably choosing to be a train spotter, and they get joy from it. But when you see a cult member and on social media, you think, oh, they've got a good bunch of friends, but all the friends they know are in the cult. They don't know anybody outside the cult. So you see pictures of people on social media, and it's not just them. So it's not just like, this is me. It's like, well, you look like you've got some friends, and you look like life is going well for you. And families can be deceived into thinking, well, the person seems to be doing all right in the cult. Why would they want to be part of the family again? We didn't get on, they're having such a good time in the cult, and they give up. But they don't realise everything that goes on behind the scenes in a cult. That person smiling on social media, seemingly with friends around them, could be in an abusive situation. And they are, if they're in a cult, because they're being abused from behind the pulpit. And this is one of the things that deceives people, and why people get in, lonely people or people looking for a different friendship group, they can end up in a cult because they go onto social media and it seems like the cult is going to be the answer to all their problems. And they go in the cult and then they realise, hang on a minute, it's all about making the leader richer and recruiting people to make the leader richer, and then they leave. If they leave, as I said, this channel is all about showing people the tricks of the cults. It's when it's like these gurus you see on social media. Join my Amazon course, or this is how to make £10,000 a month, or this book is the best book ever, it will sort all your problems out. All your dating problems, all this influencer, or this conspiracy theorist. Even people will join a group and it's just a pack of lies. You can see how cultic elements spread out beyond just cults and multi-level marketing. It's this deceptive dynamic of this group or this book or this leader is oh so wonderful, and then you don't get the results. Anyway, let me just read upwards. So if I had a friend we could climb over, I've mentioned that. Some therapists help better than others. One therapist, if you can afford a therapist, or one friend, might help you in certain areas, but they're not going to help you in other areas. Just a quick story. I had a friend, past tense, and one of my philosophies in life is you have to cut off toxic people, right? And I did that. It's like I'm not going to have negative people consume my energy, but there's still one or two toxic people in my life. But this particular friend, he got involved with a group, and it was a sort of therapy group to deal with depression. And we were meant to meet up for lunch, and he didn't show up, and he didn't let me know. And this happened several times, and I thought, bloody hell, mate! You say we're going to have lunch and hang out and chat, and then you don't show up. And I just got really pissed off, and I said, what the, swore at him or whatever. And that it's like he has used that the one time I lost it, and thought, this is the bloody 10th time you've said we're going to have lunch and you don't show up. And I thought, but he was a friendly guy, and sometimes we don't cut off toxic people because they might let you down, but then it's almost like when they cut you off, it still hurts. Nobody likes to be a friendship to be cut off, especially if it wasn't your fault. But sometimes in life that happens. You can be a positive person who's had a bad day, and then they just move on to somebody else. And this friend, I send them text messages to say, how you doing? But I've been completely shunned, and as I said in a previous video, you can have partial recovery, but not full recovery. But this friend of mine, because he is a friend of other friends, then they've distanced themselves as well. And it's like, oh God, I got to... Group dynamics can be very frustrating. You fall out with one person, but then they take other friends away with them, and they probably gossip behind the scenes. Oh, he was moaning about me. And then all these sort of dynamics, you don't only get them in cults, you get them outside of cults. A leader says something stupid behind the pulpit, and you say to your friend, well, that's clearly wrong. Let me have a word with the leader. And then you have a word with the leader, and then behind the scenes, the leader alienates you from your best friend in the group. And it's like, oh, I better keep quiet then. And then you've got to try and make a new best friend, Right, what else is there? It didn't work for me. Right, this is... I'm trying to remember why I put that. I didn't find a wife, didn't find friendships. Yeah, it didn't work for me. But some people will still stay in a cult. It's like, well, I'm not getting a wife. Oh God, you need more faith. People will literally spend their whole life in a cult thinking God is going to provide them a wife or God is going to provide them a job. And this is what they'll be told from behind the pulpit. Well, you need to recruit more people. You need to give more money. And then God will give you what you want. So they keep you on the treadmill. This is probably why I wasted 20 years. Because in the cult, the dating in ICOC, ICC, RCW, every Saturday night, a date, it was very easy to set up, but it doesn't mean you could go on 100 dates or 1,000 dates and still not find anybody, because it's so competitive. And it's sort of like the best people marry off with the best people, and everyone else is just left on the shelf, because they all want the best, because that's what the preacher says. You need to marry a godly woman, and anyone who's flawed in any kind of way gets left on the shelf, and it's so bizarre, these cult dynamics. I think I've covered this. Video. Let me just pause it. Yep, that's good enough. I'm going to do a video 35 talking about why ex-members might not help other ex-members very well.